Hello to everyone watching. A near intumescent mature cataract. A decision was made to perform manual small incision cataract surgery, and I'll take you directly to the part where cortex aspiration is being performed. Normally, when you have an intumescent cataract, there isn't much of cortex, and what little of cortex exists, it's very fluffy, loose, and doesn't require much effort to take out. But the challenge in this case is a very small pupil. And when you have a small pupil, it's your job to make sure that the cortex behind the iris is also taken out. And as you can see, as you retract the iris manually, you can see a lot of cortex existing. It's risky to directly go and try to grab it. A decision was again made to place the IOL, going with a single piece PMMA IOL. And the way you place the IOL when there is already cortex in the capsular bag helps to manipulate the cortex and make it a little bit looser. So the purpose here, the idea here, is to place the IOL and scrape it against the cortex in such a manner that the haptics rub against the cortex matter, against the cortical matter, and get loosened up a little bit, going with a little more visco to push the IOL down because the trailing haptic has yet to be placed. The another challenge with a small pupil is you aren't able to grasp the optic haptic junction with the dialer, and the dialing hole definitely needs to be avoided because you can go through and touch the iris, which can cause further meiosis. So finally, we are able to secure some traction at the optic haptic junction, and you can see the cortex is already loosening up. It's very tempting at this stage to just pull the cortex out, but have some patience. That cortex most certainly will come out on its own with a little bit of scraping with the trailing haptic. Now holding the the dialing hole, pushing the trailing haptic inside, trying to scrape as much as possible, and quite a lot of cortex has been released. So nice job so far. But you can still see that the trailing haptic probably is in the sulcus because the pupil is peaking at the 6 o'clock position. You need to address that before you start cortical aspiration. Manually retracting the iris a little bit, going to the optic haptic junction, now going to the hole. The target here is a circular pupil, and there you have it. Now you can proceed with taking out whatever cortex has been loosened up, but as you can notice, there is a very large chunk right underneath the incision at the 12 o'clock position that seems to be behind the IOL. And how do you know it's behind the IOL? It doesn't flutter as much when you're trying to hydrate the anterior chamber. So you're just milking out, just pressing onto the iris and trying to take it out. And this is something I want you to observe. There, see, the patient can move anytime. This is towards the end of the case, restless patient. Luckily, the IOL is already in place, but if the IOL is not, then your capsular bag can be in danger. So you need to have a swift movement of retraction of the instrument. Now I'm trying to manipulate it through the side port, trying to manipulate the cortex, but not much luck. I need to go through the main wound itself. So here I'm pushing the Simcoe cannula underneath the IOL, above the iris and above the posterior capsule. So my cannula is behind the IOL. The IOL is partly back into the AC, but that's okay. We'll push it back down after removal of the cortex. So here you've loosened up a lot of the cortex by the IOL itself, by the IOL rotation itself. Ideally, you do not want to go in the periphery chasing it, but since it's a small pupil, you can go a small distance. And since this is behind the IOL, there is very little risk of catching the anterior capsular margin, the capsular excess margin. Now, this is an avoidable step if you wish to. I'm just injecting a little bit viscoelastic underneath the IOL to create some space so that my posterior capsule is pushed a little bit behind. Going again, now there's enough space. I can simply go a little more into the periphery with confidence because of the viscoelastic. Trying to grasp the base of the cortex and not just the tips, because the tips will just break off and the base will remain. That's the same principle as you would do in a bimanual IA or in a regular IA without the IOL. And there you go. It's definitely a clear optical axis, and even the periphery has as little cortex as possible. And the reason for that is you don't want to leave a lot of cortex behind is because it can cause a lot of post-operative uveitis. So that's how you manage such a case.